Daniel sat at the head of the table, tie still knotted, sleeves rolled to his forearms, scrolling through emails as if the world beyond his screen mattered more than the woman who had cooked for him with trembling hands. "Did you even taste it?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, startled, as though remembering she was there. "What? The food?" "Yeah, it was good." He offered a smile, polite, practiced, and returned to his phone. Clara turned back to the window. "Good. Not delicious. Not you outdid yourself. Just good. Like the weather. Like the new client he'd signed." Functional praise for a woman who once made him laugh until he cried. She remembered their early days. Picnics in the park, him feeding her strawberries under cherry blossoms, promising, "We'll build something beautiful, Clara, together." Back then, together meant everything. Now it felt conditional. She took a breath, the kind that gathers courage from the deepest part of your chest. "Daniel, I've been thinking." He finally set his phone down. About us. About children." The room stilled. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's expression shifted just slightly, but Clara saw it. The tightening around his eyes. The way his jaw clenched before he spoke. "Clara, we've been over this." "I know," she said, stepping closer, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. "But it's not going away. It's part of me. I wake up some mornings and I can already hear their laughter. I imagine tiny hands in mine, bedtime stories, scraped knees. I see it so clearly, Daniel, like it's supposed to be." He stood slowly, smoothing his shirt as if straightening his thoughts. "And I've told you I don't want that life. I never did. Marriage, partnership, building something meaningful, yes. But kids? No, that's not negotiable." "Not negotiable?" Her voice cracked. "Or not possible for you?" "It's simply not what I want," he said, firmer now. "And if you can't accept that..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. She looked at him, really looked. The man she'd loved for 8 years. The man whose hand she'd held through his father's funeral, whose dreams she'd supported while quietly burying her own. And in that moment, she saw the truth. He wasn't refusing children. He was refusing vulnerability. Fear disguised as certainty. But knowing that didn't make the wound hurt less. "Daniel," she said, tears welling but not falling. She wouldn't give them that power yet. "What if I can't live a life where I never get to be a mother?" He hesitated. Just a second. Long enough for hope to flicker. Then I guess we don't have a marriage." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward, reshaping everything. Clara didn't cry. Not then. She walked to the bedroom, packed a small suitcase. Not dramatically, not angrily. Just with the quiet finality of someone who finally understood her own worth. That night, as she stepped into a taxi with nothing but her coat and her dignity, the city blurred into streaks of gold and gray. She didn't look back. But inside, a storm raged. Not of anger, but of grief for the future she thought she'd have. And a strange, trembling hope for the one she might still build alone. She didn't know it yet, but in 3 years' time, she'd stand under crystal chandeliers at a gala, her hand resting on the shoulders of 3 children with her eyes and his smile, and Daniel would see them, and finally understand what not negotiable had really cost him. But for now, there was only the rain, the ache in her chest, and the first fragile step toward a life she would define on her own terms. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada topico que for desenvolve. Mi conti sobrio topico tu com dialogo como su fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de desenvolver com vida moco. Com os sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters Quinn 3, max 7:15 p.m. the weeks after that rainy night. Settled like dust on forgotten furniture. Quiet, pervasive, and suffocating. Clara moved through their shared penthouse like a ghost, folding sweaters that no longer held his scent, boxing photo frames that showed them smiling on beaches they'd never visit again. Daniel had moved into a sleek downtown loft within days. citing work demands and clean breaks. But Clara knew the truth. He'd already left long before his suitcase crossed the threshold. Now, mornings began with silence. No shared coffee. No lazy banter about the news. Just the hum of the espresso machine and the echo of her own breath. She'd stare at the empty chair across from her, remembering how he used to tap his spoon against his cup 3 times before taking a sip. Just a small, silly ritual she'd once found endearing. Now, it was a ghost of intimacy. At night, the city glittered below, indifferent to her loneliness. She'd sit on the balcony wrapped in the oversized cardigan she'd bought during their honeymoon in Tuscany, the one he'd teased her for wearing even in summer. Back then, his teasing had felt like affection. Now, it felt like evidence of a language they no longer spoke. Their friends didn't know what to say. Dinner invitations dwindled. When they did come, it was always with careful glances and hushed tones, as if grief were contagious. "You're so strong, Clara," they'd say, patting her hand like she was made of porcelain. But strength wasn't what she felt. She felt hollow, like someone had scooped out her center and left behind a beautifully furnished shell. One evening, her best friend Lena came over unannounced, arms full of takeout and wine. She took one look at Clara, still in her work blazer, untouched dinner on the counter, eyes red-rimmed from crying in the shower, and dropped everything. "Okay," Lena said, pulling her into a hug so tight Clara could feel her heartbeat. "Talk." Clara shook her head, voice thin. "There's nothing to say. He's gone. And I'm still here." "But you're not just here," Lena insisted, guiding her to the couch. "You're alive. You're brilliant. I'm a woman who wanted to be a mother," Clara interrupted, tears finally spilling over. "And the man I loved told me that dream wasn't allowed in his life." Lena squeezed her hand. "Then maybe it's time to stop asking permission." The words hung in the air like a dare. Later that night, alone again, Clara stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom. She studied her reflection. Tired eyes, hair pulled back in a messy knot, lips unadorned. But beneath the exhaustion, something stirred. Not hope, not yet, but resolve. She remembered the way Daniel used to flinch at the sound of children laughing in the park. How he'd changed the subject whenever someone brought up baby names or school districts. It wasn't cruelty, it was fear. Fear of failing. Fear of losing control. Fear of becoming the distant father he'd never forgiven. And she feared never loving deeply enough to leave a legacy. The next morning, she returned to her architecture firm with shoulders squared. She accepted a high-profile project designing a community center for underprivileged families. Something Daniel would have called sentimental. She didn't care. For the first time in months, she felt purpose, not just pain. But at night, curled under blankets that still smelled faintly of the lavender detergent they'd bought together, she'd whisper to the dark, "What if I'm too late?" The city outside offered no answers. Only lights blinking like distant stars, cold and beautiful and utterly alone. And yet, in that quiet, something began to grow. Not the life she hadn't spoken the words aloud. Not until one rainy Thursday in late October, when Lena dragged her to a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. Steam curled from their mugs, and rain streaked the window like silent tears. "I'm thinking about options," Clara said suddenly, her fingers tightening around her cup. Lena looked up, eyes sharpening. "Options," Clara swallowed. "Fertility clinics, egg freezing, maybe surrogacy. I don't know, but I can't keep pretending this ache will just fade." Lena reached across the table, her voice soft but urgent. "Clara, are you sure? That path, it's not just money. It's your heart. Every step is hope wrapped in risk." "I know," Clara whispered, "but isn't it worse to live wondering? To wake up at 60 and realize I was too afraid to try." The silence between them stretched, filled only by the hiss of the espresso machine and the distant chime of the cafe bell. Then Lena leaned in. "Then you don't walk that path alone. You hear me? However it goes, I'm with you." Clara nodded, tears prickling but not falling. Not yet. But that night, back in her apartment, She sat on the edge of the bed and opened her laptop. She clicked through clinic websites, reading about success rates, hormone protocols, waiting lists that stretched years long. Her chest tightened with every statistic, every testimonial that ended in either joy or quiet resignation. And then her breath caught. There it was. A footnote on one page. Natural conception is still possible even after emotional separation, if intercourse occurred recently. Her mind raced. That last night. The one before the rain. Before the suitcase. Before the words, no child. No marriage had shattered everything. They'd made love, not out of passion, but out of grief. A final attempt to remember who they'd been. She'd been on a break from birth control, stressed, forgetting to refill her prescription. And he hadn't used protection. Neither had spoken of it afterward. It was just another unspoken thing buried under silence. Now that single night loomed like a ghost. Her hand drifted to her abdomen, light as a prayer. Could it be? She told no one. Not even Lena. Not yet. Instead, she waited, watching her body for signs, for shifts, for anything that might whisper yes. Her period was late, only 3 days, but her cycles had always been erratic under stress. Still, her breasts felt tender. A strange fatigue clung to her mornings. And one afternoon, while reviewing blueprints, she'd been overwhelmed by the smell of coffee. Suddenly nauseating, repulsive in a way it had never been before. Her hands trembled as she stood in the pharmacy aisle, staring at the row of pregnancy tests like they were prophecy scrolls. She bought the most sensitive one, paid in cash, and walked home in a daze. That evening, in the bathroom with the door locked and the world holding its breath, she waited. 2 pink lines. Not faint, not ambiguous. Real. She sank to the floor, back against the cool tile, the test clutched in her hand like a verdict. Not 1 line. Not 2. 3. She blinked. Read the instructions again. Looked again. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. Triplets. The word echoed in her skull, vast and terrifying and luminous. She should call someone, should scream, should cry. But she just sat there, tears streaming silently down her face. One hand pressed to her stomach, the other gripping the edge of the sink like it was the only thing keeping her from floating away. Outside, the city pulsed on, unaware that inside this quiet apartment, a universe had just been born. And Clara, alone, trembling, awestruck, whispered the only words that made sense. I'm going to be a mother. Not we, not he and I. Me. The realization didn't bring peace. Not yet. It brought terror, responsibility, the crushing weight of doing this alone. But beneath the fear, something else bloomed, fierce, radiant, unshakable. This wasn't just a pregnancy. It was a rebellion, a miracle she hadn't asked for, but one she would fight for with every breath. She didn't know how she'd manage the finances, didn't know how she'd explain it to Daniel, if she ever would, didn't know if her body could carry 3 lives. But as she placed a hand over her still flat stomach and felt the impossible warmth beneath her palm, she knew one truth with D would make it real, and reality, she knew, could be cruel. But one evening, as golden hour bled through her apartment windows, her phone buzzed with a name she hadn't seen in months. Daniel. Her breath locked in her throat. She let it ring once, twice. On the third, she answered. Clara. His voice was calm, measured. The voice of the man who negotiated million-dollar deals, not the one who once whispered, I love you, against her temple in the dark. I heard you've been avoiding my calls. I've been busy, she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Busy enough to ghost your own lawyer? The divorce papers are ready. We just need your signature. She closed her eyes. Of course, the final knot in a fraying rope. Send them, she said softly. There was a pause, longer than expected. Is that it? What else is there, Daniel? Another silence. Then, quietly, I saw you at the hospital last week. Her blood turned to ice. She'd gone for her first ultrasound. Alone, trembling in the waiting room, clutching her coat like armor. She hadn't seen him, but he'd seen her. You looked Different, he continued, his tone unreadable. Pale. Nervous. I'm fine, she said too quickly. Are you? His voice dropped, edged with something unfamiliar. Concern? Guilt? Because if you're sick or… I'm not sick, she cut in, then hesitated. The lie hovered on her tongue, heavy as stone. But how could she tell him now? By the way, the night we said goodbye, you gave me 3 lives? He'd either retreat in panic or demand control, neither of which she could survive right now. I'm just moving on, she finished. Another pause. Then, with a quiet finality that felt like a door closing. Then sign the papers, Clara. Let's both be free. He hung up. She stood there, phone pressed to her ear long after the call ended, her free hand instinctively cradling her stomach. Still flat, but already changing. Already theirs. That night, she spread the divorce documents across her kitchen table under the soft glow of a single lamp. Her pen hovered over the signature line. 1 stroke and it would be over, legally, irrevocably done. But as she stared at the ink, a wave of dizziness hit her. Not from pregnancy this time, but from the weight of what she was about to do. She wasn't just signing away a marriage. She was signing away the right to say we, to share midnight worries, to have someone hold her hair back when she vomited, to whisper fears into a warm shoulder. She would be alone, truly alone. Tears blurred the paper. She pressed her palm flat against her abdomen, as if grounding herself in the only truth that mattered now. I'm scared, she whispered to the quiet, but I won't abandon you. And with a breath that felt like both surrender and defiance, she signed her name. Then she folded the papers, sealed them in the envelope, and placed them by the door for tomorrow's courier. But before she turned off the light, she opened her journal. Its pages blank except for 1 line she'd written weeks ago. What if I'm too late? Now, beneath it, she wrote a new sentence, her handwriting shaking but sure. It's not too late. It's just beginning. Outside, the moon hung full and silver over the city, casting long shadows and soft light in equal measure. And in the heart of that quiet apartment, 3 tiny hearts beat on, unseen, unknown to the world, but already changing. But freedom, she quickly learned, was a double-edged word. It meant no one to answer to, but also no one to lean on when the nausea hit at 3 a.m., no one to share the first flutter of movement low in her belly, no one to marvel with when the ultrasound technician smiled and said, "Look at them, 3 perfect little souls already holding hands." She didn't tell Daniel. Not then. Not ever, she thought. What would be the point? He'd made his choice clear. No child, no marriage. And now there were 3 children. The irony was too cruel to speak aloud. Months passed. Her body changed, her waist rounding, her skin glowing in ways she didn't recognize. She learned to sleep on her left side, to count kicks, to laugh through tears when strangers asked, "Just 1?" And she murmured, "Actually 3. Lena became her rock, accompanying her to appointments, assembling cribs in the middle of the night, holding her hair back during the worst of the morning sickness that bled into afternoon and evening. "You're not just strong, Clara," Lena told her once, rubbing her back as she sobbed from exhaustion. "You're rewriting what courage looks like. But even courage has limits." One evening, deep into her 2nd trimester, Clara sat on the floor of the half-finished nursery. 3 cribs arranged in a soft triangle, mobiles dangling above like silent guardians. She stared at the ultrasound photo taped to the wall, 3 tiny profiles pressed close, and whispered, "What if I fail you?" The silence offered no answer. Then her phone rang. It was her obstetrician's office. Not unusual, but the tone in the nurse's voice was, "Ms. Reyes, your latest blood work showed elevated markers. We'd like you to come in first thing tomorrow." It could be nothing. But with triplets, we have to be extra cautious. The words preterm labor and bed rest hung unspoken between them. That night, Clara lay awake, one hand on her belly, feeling the restless movements within. Kicks, rolls, tiny lives pulsing with urgency. Fear coiled in her stomach, colder than any winter. She wasn't just risking her heart anymore. She was risking theirs. And still no one to call. No husband to pace the hallway. No partner to squeeze her hand and say, "We'll get through this." Just her. Alone. But as dawn crept through the blinds, painting the nursery in soft gold, something shifted inside her. Not hope, hope was too fragile now, but resolve. A quiet, blazing certainty. She wouldn't let fear steal this from her. She went to the appointment, listened to the doctor's cautious words, accepted the modified bed rest, the reduced workload, the strict schedule of monitoring. And that evening, she called her firm. "I need to step back," she said, voice trembling but clear. "Not out. Just not in the way I was." To her surprise, her boss didn't hesitate. "Take all the time you need. You built that community center with your soul, Clara. The world can wait while you build something even more important." She hung up and pressed her forehead to the cool glass of the nursery window. Outside, the city hummed. Cars, sirens, distant laughter. Life moving on, indifferent. But inside, a storm of love and terror raged in perfect balance. And then, one quiet afternoon, as she sat propped up on the couch with a blanket over her lap and a book unread in her hands, she felt it. A deep, rhythmic pressure, then another, then a third. Not kicks, not flutters, hiccups, all three in gentle succession. She laughed through tears, placing her hands gently over the places where each tiny body pressed against her skin. "Oh," she whispered, voice thick with awe. "You're already here." In that moment, the loneliness didn't vanish, but it changed. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was sacred space. Room for three hearts to grow where one man's fear had tried to keep them out. She didn't know what the future held. Prematurity, financial strain, sleepless nights that stretched into years. But she knew this, she would meet every challenge standing. Because she wasn't just Clara anymore. She was theirs. And as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows and soft light across the room, she closed her eyes and let herself believe, just for a moment, that they would be enough. Just her. Then came the night the pain changed. Not the usual pressure. Not the dull throb of stretched ligaments. This was sharper, urgent, like her body was trying to tell her something it couldn't put into words. "Lena," she gasped, fumbling for her phone at 2:17 a.m., voice thin with panic. I think they're coming." Within 20 minutes, Lena was at her door, wide-eyed, already dialing the hospital as she helped Clara into the car. The drive was a blur of streetlights and labored breathing, Clara's hands gripping the seat as another contraction rolled through her like a wave. "They're too early," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "They're not ready. They're fighters," Lena said firmly, eyes on the road but her voice thick with emotion. "Just like their mom." At the hospital, nurses moved with calm efficiency, but Clara saw the flicker in their eyes, the silent calculation. Triplets at 33 weeks. High risk. Every minute in the womb mattered. She was wheeled into a delivery room, monitors beeping like frantic birds. The anesthesiologist explained the epidural. The OB-GYN, gentle but serious, said, "We'll do everything we can, Clara, but your body's made its decision." And then, amid the sterile lights, the cold air, the overwhelming sense of being both utterly alone and profoundly witnessed, she pushed. Once, twice, the third time, and then cries. Not one, not two, three. Fierce, indignant, beautiful cries that shattered the silence like glass. Tears flooded Clara's face as the first baby, a girl, was placed briefly on her chest, warm and slick and trembling. "Elena," Clara whispered, the name she'd chosen in secret months ago, after her grandmother who raised 6 children alone during the war. Then another girl, pink-cheeked and squalling. Maya. And finally, the smallest, quietest one. A boy with Daniel's sharp chin and her wide eyes. She barely had time to touch his cheek before the neonatal team whisked them away to the NICU, each wrapped in tiny blankets, fragile as morning frost. "They're stable," a nurse assured her as they transferred her to recovery. "But they'll need time. Weeks, maybe longer." Clara nodded, exhausted, hollowed out, but alive in a way she'd never known. Later, In the dim glow of the NICU, she stood before 3 incubators, her legs still weak, her heart full to bursting. Tubes, wires, tiny chests rising and falling under warm lights. Lena stood beside her, silent, tears glistening in her own eyes. "They're perfect," Lena breathed. Clara reached through the porthole of the first incubator, her finger brushing Elena's palm. The baby's fingers curled instantly around hers. Instinct, trust, a bond no legal document could erase. And in that moment, something inside Clara cracked open. Not with grief, but with awe. She hadn't just survived. She had created 3 lives, out of loss, out of silence, out of a single night of goodbye that had somehow become a beginning. Days turned into a rhythm of pumping milk at 3 a.m., slow walks down the NICU hallway, learning to read the language of oxygen monitors and feeding schedules. The nurses began to smile when she arrived. "The triplet mom," they'd say. "She's the bravest one we've seen." And still, she told no one who their father was. Not out of spite, but because this was hers. This miracle, this second chance. She wouldn't let his fear or his absence define their story. Yet, late one night, as she sat beside Maya's incubator, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall, she whispered, almost to herself, "He should know." Lena, sitting in the chair nearby, looked up. "Do you want him to?" Clara was silent for a long time. The hum of machines filled the space between them. "I don't know," she finally said, "but they deserve to know where they come from. Even if he's not ready, they are." Outside, the city slept, unaware that in this quiet room, 3 tiny hearts were beating out a future no one had predicted. A future that had already begun, long before any gala, long before any confrontation, long before Daniel would ever look into their eyes and understand what he'd walked away from. For now, there was only this: the warmth of tiny fingers, the scent of softly in the corner of the nursery. Leftovers from the NICU she couldn't bring herself to pack away. Elena had colic. Maya refused to latch without fussing. Leo, smaller, quieter, would go still for too long sometimes, and Clara would rush to his crib, breath caught in her throat, just to see his chest rise. But through the exhaustion, something unexpected grew. Joy. Not the grand, sweeping kind she'd once imagined. No sun-drenched picnics. No father lifting toddlers onto his shoulders. But the quiet, stubborn kind that blooms in the cracks of despair. The way Elena's fingers curled around hers during feedings. The first time Maya laughed. A sound like wind chimes after rain. The way Leo, even at 6 months, would stare at her with eyes so knowing it felt like he saw straight into her soul. Still, the world outside didn't pause for miracles. Bills piled up. Her savings dwindled. She'd taken freelance architecture work from home, sketching floor plans with a baby strapped to her chest. Deadlines met between naps and feedings. One afternoon, after missing a payment on the heating bill, she sat on the nursery floor, back against the crib, silent tears tracking down her cheeks as Leo babbled softly in her lap. Lena found her there. "You can't do this alone," Lena said, kneeling beside her, voice firm but tender. "I have to," Clara whispered. "There's no one else." "There's me," Lena said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And there's him." Clara stiffened. "Don't." "He has a right to know," Lena insisted gently. "Not for him, for them. For medical history, for school forms, for life." Clara looked down at Leo, who reached up and patted her wet cheek with his tiny palm, as if to say, "It's okay." That night, after the twins finally slept and Leo drifted off in her arms, she sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper. She wrote Daniel's name at the top, then crossed it out. Wrote again, "Your children are here." She stared at it for an hour, then tore it up. Not yet. Not like this. Instead, she opened her laptop and applied for a small business grant, one for women rebuilding after hardship. She pitched a redesign project for low-income family housing, incorporating accessible spaces for parents with multiples. Her proposal was raw, honest, infused with the truth of her own nights and fears. 3 months later, she got the call. She'd won. The grant didn't just cover debts, it gave her back her career, her voice, her dignity. She hired a part-time nanny, just 10 hours a week, to give her room to breathe, to draw, to remember who she was beyond mom. And slowly, the fog of survival began to lift. One spring morning, as she pushed the triplets in a custom stroller through the park, she overheard a woman say to her friend, "Look at that, 3 at once. I don't know how she does it." Clara didn't turn, but inside, something shifted. She did know how. One breath, one bottle, one sleepless night at a time. And then the letter came. Elegant envelope, thick paper, embossed logo. "You are cordially invited to the annual Horizon Foundation Gala in recognition of your groundbreaking work in inclusive urban design." Her hands trembled. This was more than validation. This was visibility. And she knew, with a chill that ran down her spine, he would be there. Daniel sat on the board of Horizon. She hadn't seen him in over 2 years. She looked at the triplets playing on the rug, Elena stacking blocks, Maya chasing a ball, Leo watching both with quiet intensity, and whispered, "What do I do?" Lena, sitting beside her, didn't hesitate. "You go. You walk in there like the woman who carried 3 hearts through fire. And if he sees them, let him see what he walked away from." Clara closed her eyes. Fear whispered, "He'll demand rights. He'll disrupt their peace." But another voice, deeper, truer, rose above it. "They are yours, and you are theirs. Nothing can change that." She accepted the invitation, and as she folded the RSVP card, her fingers brushed the edge of the photo on her desk. 3 toddlers, sticky-faced and grinning, arms around each other like they'd known each other forever. They were ready, and so was she. Even if it broke her heart all over again, she would stand tall, because this time she wasn't going alone. And chaos, each with their own voice, their own fire. Elena, bold and bright, already declared she'd be an astronaut who builds houses on Mars. Maya, tender-hearted and watchful, carried bandages in her pockets, just in case someone gets sad. And Leo, the quiet observer, could dismantle a toy and rebuild it by lunchtime, his small hands moving with a focus that reminded Clara, again and again, of someone she tried not to think about. Professionally, Clara had risen, not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. Her community housing project had won national recognition, praised for its empathy in design. Wider hallways for double strollers, sound-dampened playrooms for overstimulated children, kitchens with lower counters for little helpers. She'd rebuilt not just buildings, but her own worth, brick by brick, blueprint by blueprint. And still, she never mentioned their father. Not to the pediatrician, not to the preschool teachers, not even when Maya, at 4, asked, "Do we have a daddy like Sophie does?" Clara had knelt, cupped her daughter's face, and said softly, "You have me, and that will always be enough." But the truth was heavier than she let on, because now the gala loomed. She stood in her bedroom a week before the event, the invitation pinned to her mirror like a challenge. The dress, a deep emerald silk she'd commissioned from a local designer, lay draped over the chair, elegant and intimidating. She hadn't worn heels in years, hadn't been in a room full of people who spoke in mergers and acquisitions instead of nap schedules and snack rotations. "You're nervous?" Lena said from the doorway, arms crossed, a knowing smile on her lips. Clara didn't deny it. What if he causes a scene? What if he tries to claim them? "Then you remind him that love isn't claimed," Lena said gently. "It's earned, and you've been earning it every single day." That evening, as the triplets played in the living room, Elena directing an elaborate space mission, Maya tending to stuffed animals in her clinic, Leo building a tower of blocks so tall it defied physics. Clara watched them, heart aching with pride and fear in equal measure. She crouched beside Leo. "Are you excited to go to the big party with Mommy?" He looked up, dark eyes serious. "Will there be cake?" "Yes," she laughed, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Lots of cake. And music. And dancing," she added. He considered this, then nodded. "Okay, I'll go." Later, After bedtime stories and forehead kisses, she sat alone on the couch, the city lights twinkling beyond the glass. Her phone buzzed, an email from the Horizon Foundation. Special seating has been arranged for you and your guests. Please arrive by 7:15 p.m. Her guests, not +1, not family. Guests, they knew. Of course they did. The press had run a feature. Architect Clara Reyes redefines family-centered design. Inspired by her triplets, there had been photos. Smiling, unmistakable. He would see them coming. And for the first time, she didn't feel shame or anger. She felt ready. Because these children weren't accidents. They weren't mistakes. They were her answer to every no. Her defiance of every limitation. Her living proof that love doesn't need permission to grow. The night before the gala, she laid out 3 tiny outfits. Coordinated but not matching. Because we're not a set, Elena had insisted. She packed diapers, snacks, a favorite stuffed rabbit for Maya, and Leo's thinking bear. She rehearsed answers to questions she hoped no one would ask. And when she tucked them in that night, she whispered, "Tomorrow, the world gets to see how amazing you are." Maya yawned. "Are you amazing too, Mommy?" Clara's eyes filled. "Only because you made me that way." She kissed each forehead, turned off the light, and stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to their breathing. Steady, trusting, whole. Outside, the city slept. But inside, 3 hearts beat in rhythm with hers, unaware that tomorrow, everything might change. Not because of him, but because of them. And as Clara walked back to her room, she didn't brace for confrontation. She walked with her head high, already knowing the truth no gala, no man, no past could take from her. She hadn't just survived. She had built a legacy. And its surprising poise, and Elena practiced her fancy walk in the seat beside her. "You look like princesses," Clara whispered, her voice tight with emotion she couldn't name. Pride, fear, something trembling on the edge of hope. "Like architect princesses," Elena corrected, chin lifted. "We build things." Clara smiled, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Grand Meridian Hotel, where golden lights spilled onto the red carpet and cameras flashed like distant stars. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. This wasn't her world. The designer gowns, the champagne flutes, the murmured names of CEOs and philanthropists. But then Maya reached for her hand, small fingers curling around hers with quiet trust, and Leo leaned against her leg, wide-eyed but steady. She took a breath and stepped out. Immediately, the crowd parted, not out of recognition but out of sheer surprise. A woman in emerald silk, elegant and composed, flanked by 3 identical children in miniature formal wear, their faces open, curious, unafraid. Whispers followed like rustling silk. "Are those hers? Triplets. I heard she did it all alone." Clara held her head high, guiding them through the lobby with calm precision. The foundation staff greeted her warmly, ushering them to a private lounge adjacent to the main ballroom. "You'll be seated at table 7, the coordinator said, eyes flickering with something like admiration. "And we've taken the liberty of placing your children in the adjoining family viewing area during the speeches. Quiet, comfortable, with direct sight lines." "Thank you," Clara said, voice steady, though her pulse hammered in her throat. She knelt to their level. "You'll be just through that door," she said, pointing. "You can see me the whole time, and after there's cake. Lots of it." Elena crossed her arms. "What if someone asks who our daddy is?" Clara's breath caught. She looked into her daughter's eyes, so much like hers, yet edged with a boldness that felt inherited from someone else entirely. "Then you say," she said softly, "we have a mom who loves us more than anything. That's all we need." Maya hugged her tight. Leo simply nodded, as if he'd already decided the evening's terms. She kissed each forehead, then watched them disappear into the softly lit room with a nanny from the foundation waiting inside. Only when the door closed did she allow herself to exhale. The ballroom glittered, crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, the low hum of polished conversation. She moved through it like a ghost from another life, nodding at familiar faces from industry events, accepting quiet congratulations, all while scanning the room with quiet dread. Where is he? She hadn't seen Daniel in over 3 years. Not since the day he signed the divorce papers without looking up. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 ways, him furious, him indifferent, him breaking down in regret. But now, standing here, dressed in strength she'd forged in silence, she realized she didn't need any of those versions. She just needed to be seen, for who she was now. She took her seat near the front, back straight, hands folded in her lap. The MC took the stage. "And now," he said, voice rich with reverence, "please welcome Clara Reyes, visionary architect, advocate for inclusive communities, and a woman whose personal journey has reshaped how we think about home, family, and resilience." Applause rose like a wave. Clara stood, heart pounding, and walked to the podium. She didn't prepare a speech, only a truth. "I used to believe a home was a structure," she began, voice clear, trembling only slightly. "For walls, a roof, maybe a fireplace. But I've learned that a home is made of choices. Of showing up, even when you're exhausted. Of loving without guarantees. Of building something beautiful from what others called impossible." She paused, glancing toward the side door where her children waited. "I didn't set out to change the world. I just wanted a place where my children would feel safe, seen, and loved. And in trying to give them that, I found my own voice." The applause was thunderous, but Clara barely heard it, because as she stepped down, turning toward the reception area, her eyes met his. Daniel stood near the champagne fountain, frozen mid-step, glass in hand, face pale as stone. He hadn't seen the speech, but he'd seen them. Earlier, during cocktails, he'd glanced toward the family lounge. And there they were. 3 small figures, laughing over miniature cupcakes. One with his sharp jawline, one with Clara's wide eyes, one with her stubborn tilt of the chin. He'd stared, uncomprehending at first. Then recognition struck like lightning. All 3. His breath had stopped. His glass nearly slipped. Now, across the ballroom, his eyes locked onto Clara's, wide, shattered, searching. She didn't look away. She didn't smile. She simply held his gaze, calm as still water, and let him see what he'd walked away from. Not a broken woman, but a mother, a creator, a force. And behind the glass wall of the family lounge, unaware of the storm unfolding just beyond, Elena tugged Maya's sleeve and pointed. "Look, the man over there keeps staring at us." Maya frowned. "He looks sad." Leo didn't say anything. He just watched. And somewhere in the space between past and present, between regret and revelation, the first thread of a new story began to. Clara didn't approach. She simply watched him watch them. Through the glass partition where Elena was now tracing shapes on the window with her finger, Maya laughing at something the nanny whispered, Leo still observing the room with that quiet intensity that always made her chest ache. A woman beside Daniel touched his arm. "Daniel, are you all right? You've gone white as a sheet." He didn't answer. His eyes never left Leo's face, the curve of his brow, the set of his mouth. It was like looking into a mirror from 30 years ago. Clara finally turned away, walking toward the dessert table with measured steps, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She needed space, a moment to steady herself before the inevitable collision. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As she reached for a glass of sparkling water, a voice behind her, low, rough, barely recognizable, cut through the hum of the gala. "Clara!" She froze. She didn't turn. Not yet. Let him say it again. Let him prove he meant it. "Clara," he said, closer now. "Those children, are they?" She turned slowly, meeting his eyes. Up close, he looked older, tired. The sharp polish of his corporate armor had softened at the edges, revealing something raw beneath. "Yes," she said simply. "They're yours." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward, silent but seismic. He staggered back half a step, as if struck. "How? When?" "That night." she said, voice quiet but unwavering. Before you left. You remember. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were glistening. I thought you'd moved on. That you'd. He stopped, shaking his head. I never imagined. 3, she finished for him, a bitter edge curling the words. No, I imagine you didn't. He looked past her, toward the lounge again, his expression crumbling. They're beautiful. Yes, she said, pride cutting through the pain. They are. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant clink of glasses and the murmur of polite conversation. Then, voice barely above a whisper, he asked, Why didn't you tell me? Clara's breath caught. Not in anger, in sorrow. Would it have changed anything, Daniel? You said no child, no marriage. I took you at your word. I didn't know, he said, voice rising just enough that a few heads turned. He lowered it quickly, shame flashing across his face. If I'd known you were pregnant, you'd have stayed out of obligation? She challenged, eyes blazing now. Is that what you think I wanted? A father who stayed because he had to, not because he chose to. He flinched. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, she said softly, but it is honest. And I chose honesty for them. I gave them a home built on love, not fear, not guilt, not conditions. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time in years. Not the wife he left behind, but the woman who had risen from the ashes of their broken promise and built something unshakable. I want to know them, he said suddenly, voice cracking. Please. Clara's throat tightened. This was the moment she dreaded and, in secret, hoped for. Not for herself, but for them. For the boy who looked like him. For the girls who deserved to know where their fire came from. She glanced toward the lounge. Elena was now pressing her palm flat against the glass, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Their eyes met through the pain, and in that instant Clara knew. She couldn't keep them from him forever, but she wouldn't hand them over lightly. If you want to know them, she said, turning back to Daniel, her voice steady as steel, you don't start with rights, you start with respect. You start by showing up, not because they're yours by blood, but because you choose them. Every single day. He swallowed hard. I will. You'll meet them slowly, on their terms, with no expectations. And if you ever make them feel like they weren't enough for you the first time, you'll never see them again. Do you understand? He nodded, tears finally spilling over. I understand. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded toward the lounge. Go say hello. Just hello. Nothing more. He took a shaky breath, straightened his jacket like a man preparing for battle, and walked toward the glass door. Clara didn't follow. She stayed where she was, heart in her throat, watching through the crowd as he paused at the threshold, hand hovering over the handle. Inside, Maya looked up first, then Elena, then Leo, and when the door opened and Daniel stepped inside, hesitant, trembling, eyes wide with awe, they didn't run to him. They just looked, as if waiting to see if he was real. And in that suspended breath of a moment, the past didn't vanish, but the future began to bend, just slightly, toward something new. Clara turned away, pressing a hand to her stomach, not out of pain, but out of memory. 3 heartbeats, 3 lives, and now a door cracked open. What came next wasn't hers to control. The triplets sat at a small round table, half-finished cupcakes before them. They looked up in unison, not startled, not eager, but watchful, assessing. Elena was the first to speak. Are you the man who was staring? Her voice was clear, unafraid. Struck him like sunlight through glass. Sudden, sharp, illuminating. Yes, he managed, crouching slowly to their level, hands resting on his knees like a penitent. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. Maya tilted her head. You look sad. He blinked, throat tight. I am. A little. Why? Leo asked. Quiet, direct, eyes locked on his as if searching for something buried deep. Daniel hesitated. What could he say to a 4-year-old? I threw away your mother because I was scared? I didn't believe I could love something so small, so fragile? He couldn't give them that weight. Not yet. So he told the simplest truth he had. Because I just met you, and I feel like I missed so much. Elena frowned. Missed what? Your first steps, he said softly. Your first words. The way you laugh. The way you build towers and knock them down just to see what happens. He glanced at Leo's half-finished block structure on the floor. I missed all of it. Silence settled over them. Not cold, but thoughtful. Then Maya slid off her chair and walked toward him, stopping just an arm's length away. Mommy says you didn't want kids, she said, voice gentle but firm, like she was reciting a fact, not an accusation. He winced. She's right. I said that. Why? Elena asked, arms crossed now, protector mode engaged. He looked at each of them, really looked. Saw Clara's resilience in Elena's stance, her tenderness in Maya's eyes, and something deeper, quieter in Leo. The same quiet intensity he'd seen in his own father's gaze long ago, before the man shut down completely. I was afraid, he admitted, voice cracking. Afraid I wouldn't be good enough. Afraid I'd break you like I thought my dad broke me. Leo studied him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked to his block tower, picked up a small blue piece, and held it out. Daniel stared at it, stunned. For me, Leo nodded. Tears blurred Daniel's vision as he took the block. Cool, smooth, ordinary. Yet it felt like a key, a beginning. Thank you, he whispered. Elena watched him, then sighed dramatically. Okay, you can sit. He did, carefully, on the edge of a tiny chair that groaned under his weight. Maya returned to her seat but kept glancing at him, as if recalibrating her understanding of the world. Outside the lounge, Clara stood just beyond the hallway archway, hidden in shadow, heart hammering. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but she couldn't walk away either. She watched as Daniel sat with his hands folded in his lap, answering their questions with halting honesty, never reaching out unless invited, never forcing affection. He wasn't performing. He was present. And then Elena asked the question Clara had feared most. Are you our daddy? The room stilled. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked toward the doorway as if sensing Clara was there, then back at Elena. I think I am, he said slowly. But I haven't earned the right to say that word yet. Not really. Maya frowned. How do you earn it? He smiled faintly, tears glistening. By showing up. By listening. By loving you even when it's hard. And by never making you feel like you weren't wanted. Leo looked at him for a long time. Then he pointed to the empty chair beside him. Sit here. Daniel's breath hitched. He moved slowly, as if afraid the moment might shatter. When he sat, Leo didn't hug him, didn't call him daddy, but he leaned, just slightly, against Daniel's arm while rebuilding his tower, as if testing the weight of a new presence in his world. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. This wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was space. And in that quiet lounge, amid half-eaten cupcakes and scattered blocks, something fragile and precious began to grow, not from obligation, but from choice. Outside, the gala continued, champagne, speeches, applause. But in here, time slowed, bent, reformed around 3 small hearts and one man finally learning how to hold them. Clara turned away, wiping her eyes, walking back toward the ballroom with her head high. She didn't know what came next, but for the first time she believed it could be kind. Because they had already decided, in their own quiet way, to give him a chance. He didn't wave, didn't call out. He simply watched until the taillights vanished around the corner, then stood in the rain-slicked street long after the last guest had gone, the echo of Leo's quiet voice still ringing in his ears. Sit here. That night, he didn't go home. Instead, he walked miles through quiet neighborhoods and sleepless avenues, past late-night diners and shuttered boutiques, replaying every moment in the lounge like a film he couldn't pause. The way Elena had studied him like a puzzle to be solved. How Maya's eyes had softened when he admitted his fear. And Leo, who hadn't said much, but had leaned into him like a question waiting for an answer. Back in his sterile, immaculate loft, the same one he'd moved into the day he left Clara. He stood in the center of the living room and realized, with a hollow ache, that it had never felt like home. Not once. He walked to the bookshelf, pulled out an old photo album he hadn't opened in years. There it was, him at 5, standing rigid beside his father at some formal event, both of them smiling with their eyes turned away from each other. He remembered the silence in their house, thick, cold, full of things unsaid. He'd sworn he'd never repeat it, and yet he almost had. He sank onto the couch, the blue block still in his coat pocket. He pulled it out now, ran his thumb over its smooth edges. Such a small thing, and yet it had undone him. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. A message from his assistant. Board meeting moved to Thursday. Also, congrats on the gala. You looked different. He didn't reply. Instead, he opened a new note on his phone and began to write. Not for anyone else, just for himself. I thought love was something you controlled, planned, contained, but they don't fit in boxes. They don't follow timelines. They just are. And I walked away from are because I was terrified of what if I fail. But she didn't ask me to be perfect. She just asked me to be there. And I wasn't. He stared at the words, then deleted them. Too neat, too easy. The truth wasn't in paragraphs. It was in showing up. Early the next morning, he called his office. Cancel my meetings for the week. All of them. His assistant hesitated. Sir, the merger. Postpone it. Then he called a number he hadn't dialed in years, his therapist. I need to come in. Today. And finally, heart pounding like a man stepping off a ledge, he texted Clara. Just 3 words. No excuses, no demands. Can I try? He didn't expect a reply. Not so soon. But an hour later, as rain began to fall again. Soft, insistent, like the city itself was holding its breath. His phone chimed. Slowly. Sundays, 10 a.m., at the park near my building. They choose if you stay. He read it 3 times. Then again. He didn't text back. He didn't need to. He just opened his closet, pulled out a plain sweater instead of a suit, and set his alarm for 8 a.m. Because this time he wouldn't arrive polished. He'd arrive present. And as he stood by the window, watching raindrops race down the glass like tiny messengers of change, he finally understood. He hadn't lost just a marriage that night 3 years ago. He'd nearly lost the chance to become the man his children deserved. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to begin. Not with grand gestures, but with a bench, a blue block, and the Cuthan standing to pace before sitting again, as if his body couldn't decide whether to flee or stay. Behind her, the triplets chattered in the kitchen, Elena choosing mismatched socks. 1 star, 1 rocket, balanced. Maya packing a tiny backpack with emergency snacks. Leo silently tying his own shoes with intense concentration. Clara's hands trembled as she buttoned Leo's jacket. Remember, she said, crouching to their level, voice low and steady. You don't have to talk to him. You don't have to hug him. You just see how you feel. And if you want to leave, we leave. Right away. Okay? Elena nodded. We're the bosses. Yes? Clara whispered, pressing a kiss to each forehead. You always are. They walked down together, the crisp air sharp in their lungs. From 20 feet away, Daniel saw them and froze. He rose slowly, hands hanging awkwardly at his sides. No briefcase, no phone, just a paper bag in one hand. He didn't approach. He waited. Clara stopped a few feet away. The children looked at him, then at her, then back at him. Hi, Daniel said, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. I brought a muffins. Blueberry. I remembered you liked them. He looked at Clara as he said it, not as a plea, but as a quiet acknowledgement of memory, of a life they'd once shared. Clara gave a small nod. Not forgiveness, just presence. Elena stepped forward first. Did you bring 3? 4? He said, managing a faint smile. 1 for your mom too. Maya narrowed her eyes. Are they store-bought or real? I made them, he admitted. Burnt one batch. These are the second try. Leo walked past them both and sat on the bench. Just like that. An invitation. Daniel exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. He sat beside Leo, careful not to touch, and handed out the muffins from the bag. Still warm, wrapped in parchment paper. Elena took hers with a suspicious sniff, then took a bite. Her eyes widened. Not bad, she declared. Daniel's shoulders relaxed, just slightly. They sat in silence for a while, eating, watching pigeons dart across the path. The tension didn't vanish. It softened, like frost under morning sun. Then Maya, crumbs on her chin, looked at Daniel. Do you know how to skip stones? He shook his head. I never learned. I can teach you, she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And just like that, the ice cracked. They walked to the pond's edge. Maya picked up a flat stone, demonstrated the flick of the wrist. Daniel tried, splashed water everywhere. Elena laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine delight. Try again. He did, and again. On the fifth try, the stone skimmed twice before sinking. Maya clapped. You're getting it. Leo, who had been watching from the bank, picked up a stone and, without a word, tossed it. It skipped 4 times. Daniel stared at him, then at Clara over Leo's head, awe, humility, something like reverence in his eyes. Later, as the sun burned off the mist, they sat on the grass. Daniel didn't ask questions about school or favorites or dreams. He just listened. When Elena rambled about building a robot dog, he asked, what would its name be? When Maya whispered that she sometimes missed having a sibling to talk to at night, he said, I'm glad you told me. And when Leo quietly showed him a drawing of a house with 4 windows, one for each of us, Daniel's breath caught, and he didn't trust himself to speak. Clara watched from a few feet away, heart breaking and mending in the same breath. This wasn't the man who'd walked out. This was someone new, someone being rebuilt by the very hearts he'd once refused. As they packed to leave, Elena turned to Daniel. Will you be here next Sunday? He looked at Clara first, asking without words. She gave the slightest nod. Yes, he told Elena. If you'll have me. Maya hugged her muffin bag to her chest. Bring chocolate next time. I'll try, he said, smiling. Leo didn't say goodbye. He just looked at Daniel for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and placed something in Daniel's palm. A smooth, gray skipping stone. Daniel closed his fingers around it like it was a vow. And as Clara led the children away, hand in hand, she didn't look back. But she felt it. The shift in the air, the quiet unraveling of old wounds, the fragile thread of something new being woven. One Thursday afternoon, as Clara reviewed blueprints in her home office, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Daniel standing there, not in a suit, but in a worn sweater, hair slightly tousled, holding a canvas tote bag. I know it's not Sunday, he said quickly, voice low, eyes glancing past her toward the hallway where the triplets were building a fort in the living room. But Maya's teacher called me. Clara's breath caught. What? He looked down, shame flickering across his face. She listed me as emergency contact on the field trip form. I didn't say anything, I just signed it. But today, the school nurse called. Maya fell off the climbing wall. She's okay, just a scraped knee. But she asked for me. Clara stared at him, heart pounding. You went to her school? I did, he said, voice thick. I held her hand while the nurse cleaned it. She called me Dad. Not Daniel. Dad. His voice broke on the word. I didn't correct her, but I didn't deserve it either. Clara stepped aside without a word. He followed her in, tentative, as if stepping onto sacred ground. In the living room, Maya looked up from the fort, her knee wrapped in a bright pink bandage. You came back. I told you I would, he said softly, kneeling beside her. Elena eyed him from behind a couch cushion. Did you bring snacks? He pulled a container from his bag. Banana bread, Leo's favorite. Leo, who had been quietly stacking books nearby, looked up. You remembered. I remember everything, Daniel said. and the weight in his voice made Clara's chest ache. She watched as he sat cross-legged in the middle of the fort, listening to Elena's dramatic retelling of a playground battle, helping Maya rebandage her knee for style, and showing Leo how to balance a book on his nose. He wasn't performing fatherhood. He was living it, awkward, imperfect, utterly present. Later, as the children drifted off to nap, Clara made tea in the kitchen. Daniel lingered in the doorway. "I should have called before coming," he said. "I overstepped." "You didn't," she said, handing him a mug. "You showed up when she needed you. That's not overstepping. That's being a parent." He wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic, eyes distant. "I keep thinking about that night, when I said no child, no marriage. I thought I was protecting us, but I was just protecting myself. From failing, from vulnerability, from becoming the distant ghost my father was." He looked at her raw. "But you walked into that fear alone and built something beautiful anyway." Tears pricked her eyes. "I didn't do it alone. I had them, and they gave me courage I never knew I had." He nodded slowly. "Do you think they'll ever see me as more than just the man who wasn't there at the beginning?" Clara was quiet for a long moment. Outside, wind rustled the trees, sending leaves skittering across the patio. "They don't measure love in years, Daniel," she said softly. "They measure it in moments, in showing up, in listening, in remembering that Leo likes his sandwich cut into triangles, not squares." She met his eyes. "You're already in their story, not as a replacement, not as a savior, just as you, trying." He swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "That's all I want." Just then, Maya appeared in the hallway, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy?" she murmured sleepily. "Can you read the dinosaur book?" Daniel's breath hitched. He looked at Clara, seeking permission. She gave a small, tender smile. "Go. She asked for you." He stood, then paused. "Thank you for letting me in." "Don't thank me," she whispered. "Thank them." As he followed Maya down the hall, Clara leaned against the kitchen counter, listening to his voice. Softer now, gentle, as he began to read. Not the polished baritone of the courtroom, but the warm, imperfect timbre of a man finally coming home. And in that quiet apartment, filled with the sound of turning pages and sleepy laughter, the past didn't vanish, but it no longer held Clara tense when his car pulled up. But the world outside their fragile peace hadn't forgotten. One evening, as Clara tucked Maya into bed, her phone buzzed with a notification from a local society blog. Power couple reunited? Architect Clara Reyes and Horizon board member Daniel Carter spotted together with triplets at charity picnic. Below it, a photo, grainy but unmistakable. Daniel kneeling in the grass, helping Elena fly a kite, Leo at his side, Clara laughing as wind tangled her hair. Her stomach dropped. She clicked the comments. "Wait, those are his kids?" He left her because he didn't want children. Now he's playing happy family? Classic rich guy redemption arc. Maya stirred. "Mommy? Who's that?" Clara quickly locked the screen. "No one, sweetheart. Just work." But the damage was done. The next morning, as Daniel arrived with weekend groceries, organic apples, Leo's favorite oat milk, Elena's dinosaur-shaped pasta, he found Clara waiting on the porch, arms crossed, eyes stormy. "Did you know?" she asked, voice low and sharp. He frowned. "Know what?" She showed him the article. He read it silently, face paling. "Clara, I didn't... People are saying you're using them." She cut in, voice trembling. "That this is some PR move after the gala. That you're trying to fix your image." Her voice broke. "They're talking about my children like they're a narrative." Daniel set the bags down, hands raised. "I had nothing to do with this. I swear." "But you're on the board," she said, stepping closer, eyes blazing. "You're seen with them now. Of course people talk. And what happens when they ask the kids at school? When someone says, 'Your dad didn't even want you?'" Her voice cracked. "I protected them from that pain for 3 years. And now it's everywhere." He looked stricken. "I never wanted to expose them. I just wanted to be with them. In a world that watches you, she said, softer now, exhaustion seeping in. You can't unsee us, Daniel. And now neither can they. Inside, the triplets appeared at the window, sensing the tension. Elena's brow furrowed. Maya pressed her hands to the glass. Leo just watched. Daniel looked at them, then back at Clara, his voice raw. Then tell me what to do. If you say walk away, I'll go. But not because I don't love them. Because I love them enough to protect them from my mistakes. Clara stared at him, the man who once chose control over chaos, certainty over love. Now, standing there with bags of groceries and a heart laid bare, he was offering the one thing she'd never expected. Surrender. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, her voice was quiet but firm. Don't walk away, but don't hide either. He frowned. What do you mean? She took a breath. We tell the truth. Not to the blogs. Not to the world. But to them. She nodded toward the window, where 3 small faces waited. They deserve to know why you left. Why you came back. Not the polished version. The real one. Messy, scared, human. Daniel swallowed hard. They're only 4. They're ours, she said. And they already feel things they can't name. Better they hear it from us, gentle, honest, than from a stranger online. He nodded slowly, tears glistening. Okay. That afternoon, they sat together on the living room floor, the 5 of them in a loose circle. Clara held Maya's hand. Daniel sat cross-legged, Leo leaning against his knee. We need to talk about something important, Clara began, voice calm. A long time ago, before you were born, Daddy and I made a choice that hurt each other. He didn't think he could be a good dad, and I didn't think I could live without being a mom. She looked at Daniel. But you 3, you changed everything. Daniel took a shaky breath. I was scared, he told them, voice thick. I thought love meant never messing up. But you taught me it means trying even when you're afraid. And I'm so sorry I wasn't there at the start. But I'm here now, and I'll never stop trying. Elena studied him. So you did not want us? You just didn't know how. He nodded. Exactly. Maya hugged her knees. Do you promise not to leave again? I promise, he said. And the weight of that vow hung in the air like a sacred thread. Leo looked up at him, eyes serious. Then you can stay for dinner. Later, as Daniel helped set the table, placing Leo's fork just so, refilling Maya's water without being asked. Clara watched from the kitchen doorway, heart full to bursting. The world might still whisper. The past might still ache. But in this kitchen, bathed in golden light and the sound of children's laughter, something new was being built. Afternoons with an umbrella in hand before Clara even reached the door. He never stayed unless asked. Never overstepped. But he was there. In the grocery store when Leo pointed at apples and said, Dad likes these. In the pediatrician's waiting room holding Maya's hand during flu shots. In the kitchen late at night washing dishes while Clara graded blueprints at the table. Yet, beneath the calm surface, a question lingered. Unspoken, heavy, inevitable. One evening, after tucking the triplets in, Clara found Daniel on the back patio, staring at the skyline, hands in his pockets. The city hummed below, distant and indifferent. You've been quiet all week, she said, joining him at the railing. He didn't look at her. I've been thinking. About. He turned then, eyes searching hers in the dim light. About us. About what we are now. Clara's breath caught. She'd known this moment would come. She just hadn't known how much it would ache. We're co-parents, she said carefully. That's enough. Is it? His voice was barely above a whisper. Because when Maya calls me Dad in her sleep, when Leo shows me his drawings before anyone else, when Elena says, Mom and Dad both think I'm brave, it doesn't feel like enough. It feels like more. She looked away, heart pounding. Daniel, we can't go back. I don't want to go back, he said, stepping closer. I want to go forward. With you. With them. Not as a couple trying to fix the past, but as 2 people who love the same 3 souls more than anything. Tears pricked her eyes. It's not that simple. We broke each other once. And we rebuilt something stronger, he said, voice trembling. Not the same. Better. Truer. She shook her head, arms crossed against the chill, and against hope. What if we break again? What if you wake up one day and realize this? Us. Is too messy, too much. He reached out, slow, giving her space to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her wrist, light, reverent. I used to think love meant control. Now I know it means showing up, even when you're scared, even when you're not sure, especially then. Inside, a floorboard creaked. They turned to see Elena in the doorway, clutching her stuffed owl. Are you fighting? She asked, voice small. Clara knelt. No, sweetheart. We're just talking. Elena looked between them, then at Daniel. Mom used to cry when she thought I was asleep. Are you making her cry again? Daniel's eyes filled. No, Elena. I'm trying to make sure she never has to. Elena studied him for a long moment. Then, with the blunt wisdom only a child can wield, she said, If you love us, you love her. You can't love one and not the other. She turned and padded back inside, leaving them standing in stunned silence. Clara looked at Daniel, tears streaming now. She's right. He nodded, voice thick. I know. That night, after the house fell quiet, Clara sat alone on the couch, staring at the photo on the mantel. Taken weeks ago at the pumpkin patch. The five of them, mid-laugh, leaves in their hair, Daniel's arm around her shoulder, light as a question. Not an answer, but a beginning. She didn't know if they'd ever be together again. Not in the way the world defined it. But she knew this. They were building something no one could take from them. Not the past. Not the rumors. Not even their own fears. Because love wasn't about never leaving. It was about choosing every single day to come back. And as she turned off the lamp, leaving only the soft glow of the streetlight through the window, she whispered to the quiet, bundled in flannel pajamas, dreaming of snow forts and hot cocoa. Inside the warm glow of the living room, Clara sat by the fire, reviewing final sketches for a new family housing project. This one designed with shared courtyards, wide entryways for strollers, and soundproof walls for sleepless parents. She'd named it The Haven, not for herself, for anyone who'd ever felt alone in the dark. A soft knock came at the door. She didn't need to check the peephole. She knew that rhythm, the pause before the second knock, the way his shadow lingered just slightly to the left. Daniel. She opened the door. He stood there, snow dusting his shoulders, cheeks pink from the cold, holding a small, wrapped box. No coat this time, just a sweater like he belonged. I know it's late, he said, voice low, but I couldn't wait. She stepped aside without a word. He followed her in, brushing snow from his hair, eyes scanning the room, the triplets drawings pinned to the fridge, the mismatched socks drying by the radiator, the faint smell of vanilla from tonight's bedtime tea. Home. Not the penthouse. Not the loft. This. He sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded, the box resting on his knees. I've been seeing a therapist, he said suddenly, not looking at her. For over a year now. Not just after the gala. Before that, too, after the divorce. I told myself it was for stress management. But it was really because I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw you, walking out that night with your suitcase. And I kept asking myself, what if I'd said yes? Clara sat opposite him, knees drawn to her chest. You didn't say yes, Daniel. You said no child, no marriage. And I chose my children. I know, he said, voice breaking. And I'll spend the rest of my life grateful you did. Because they're everything I thought I wasn't ready for, and the only things that ever made me want to become ready. He looked up then, eyes glistening. But I need you to know something. Not for us. For me. I'm not here because I want to fix the past. I'm here because I finally understand what I lost, and what I've been given a second chance to protect. He placed the box on the coffee table. Open it when I'm gone. She frowned. Daniel, please, he said, standing. Just hear me out first. He took a breath, as if gathering every ounce of courage he'd spent years rebuilding. I don't need to be your husband again. I don't even need to be your partner. But I need you to know. I see you. Not the woman I left. The woman who stood in a NICU at 3 a.m. and whispered, I've got you. The woman who fought for them when no one else believed. The woman who let me back in. Not because I deserved it, but because they deserved a father who tried. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he continued, voice trembling. I'm asking for the chance to earn your trust. One Sunday, one scraped knee, one bedtime story at a time. Not as the man who walked away. As the man your children are teaching me to be. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. The box, he said softly. It's not a ring. It's just proof. And then he was gone. Footsteps muffled by snow. Clara sat for a long time, listening to the silence. Then, slowly, she reached for the box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a single key. Beneath it, a note in his handwriting. I sold the loft. Bought a townhouse 3 blocks from here on Maple. Big backyard. 3 small bedrooms. 1 for each of them. And a 4th. For you if you ever want it. No pressure. No expectations. Just space. For us to keep choosing each other. She pressed the key to her chest, tears falling freely now. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of being seen. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in quiet promise. And for the first time in years, Clara didn't feel like she was holding Mom. She asked, holding it up from the laundry basket where Clara had absent-mindedly left her coat. What's this for? Clara froze, heart slamming against her ribs. It's just a spare key. To what? Maya asked, suddenly beside her sister, ever curious. Before Clara could answer, Leo, quiet as always, looked up from his puzzle. Dad's house. They all turned to him. How do you know? Clara whispered. Leo shrugged. He told me, when we helped him move books last week. He said, this is where I live now. Close to you. He looked at her, eyes wide and serious. He didn't say our house. He said, close to you. Clara's breath caught. Daniel had been slowly unpacking, inviting the kids for exploring missions, finding the best climbing tree in the backyard, naming the squirrels, testing the echo in the empty hallway. He'd never invited her. Not once. That afternoon, as snow began to fall again, Clara stood at her window, watching the triplets build a lopsided snowman in the yard. Daniel was there too, kneeling in the snow, helping Maya roll the middle ball, laughing as Elena dumped a bucket of snow down his back. He looked light, unburdened, present. She pulled on her boots without thinking. By the time she reached the sidewalk, they'd spotted her. Elena waved wildly. Mom, Dad's snowman has no nose. It does too, Daniel called, holding up a carrot. It's avant-garde. Maya ran to her, cheeks flushed. Come help. We're making a whole snow family. Clara walked toward them, snow crunching underfoot, heart pounding. Daniel stood slowly, brushing snow from his jeans, eyes searching hers. No expectations, just openness. She stopped a few feet away. Leo told me. He nodded. I didn't want to pressure you. I just wanted to be near. She looked at the house behind him. Modest brick, warm light in the windows, a swing already hanging from the old oak in the backyard. Not grand, not perfect, but there's in spirit. You didn't ask me, she said softly. I didn't want you to say yes out of guilt, he replied, or no out of fear. I wanted you to choose not because of me, but because of you, because you deserve a place that feels like peace. Elena tugged Clara's sleeve. Can we go inside? My fingers are icicles. Daniel opened the door. Hot cocoa's ready. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and new wood. Blankets were draped over the couch. Tiny boots lined the entryway. On the kitchen counter, 3 mismatched mugs waited. Elena's with stars, Maya's with hearts, Leo's plain blue. Clara stood in the hallway, overwhelmed. This wasn't a performance. It was a life being built quietly, for them. Maya climbed onto a stool. Dad lets us stir the marshmallows. Leo sat at the table, already sipping from his mug. It's better here, he said simply. Clara looked at Daniel. You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to, he said. Not to win you back, but to show you I'm serious. That I'm not just passing through their lives. I'm building a home in them. She turned away, tears welling. Not from sadness. From the sheer, terrifying beauty of being loved. Not perfectly, but persistently. Elena yawned, leaning against her leg. Can we stay for dinner? Clara looked at Daniel. He didn't speak, just waited. She took a breath, the kind that carries a lifetime of fear and hope in a single inhale. Yes, she said. We can stay. And as the children chattered over cocoa, as snow fell softly outside, as Daniel handed her a mug with no words, just warmth, Clara realized something. She wasn't walking back into the past. She was stepping into a future she never dared imagine. One where love wasn't about grand declarations, but daily choices. Where broken things could become stronger at the seams. Where family wasn't a static picture, but a living, breathing. Clara didn't move in all at once. There were no dramatic declarations. No ring on her finger. No rushed vows beneath cherry blossoms. Instead, her presence grew like roots. First a toothbrush in the guest bathroom, then her favorite coffee mug left on the counter, then her architecture sketches spread across the dining table late into the night while Daniel read nearby, glancing up every so often just to make sure she was still there. One evening, as golden light spilled through the kitchen windows, Maya sat at the table coloring while Daniel chopped vegetables and Clara stirred a pot of soup. It was ordinary, domestic, the kind of scene they'd once imagined but never believed they'd earn. Mom, Maya asked suddenly, crayon hovering over paper. Are we a family now? Clara's hand stilled on the spoon. She looked at Daniel, who paused mid-chop, eyes full of quiet hope. What do you think, sweetheart? Clara asked gently. Maya studied her drawing, a circle with 5 stick figures holding hands. Before, I thought family was people who live in the same house. But now, she tapped the paper. Now I think family is people who choose each other. Every day. Leo, stacking blocks nearby, didn't look up. Even when they mess up. Elena, swinging her legs from her chair, added, especially then. Daniel set down his knife and walked over, crouching beside Maya. You're right, he said, voice thick. Family isn't about never leaving. It's about always coming back. Clara walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder, light, but sure, a silent promise passing between them. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Clara stood on the back porch with Daniel, wrapped in his old sweater, the one he'd worn that first Sunday. Fireflies blinked in the dusk like tiny stars remembering their names. He never knew, Daniel said quietly, gaze fixed on the dark tree lean. My father. He never knew what he missed. The bedtime stories, the first steps, the way their faces light up when they figure something out. He turned to her, eyes glistening. You gave them that, even when I wasn't there. You gave them love without conditions. And you, she said softly, you gave them a father who stayed, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He reached for her hand, fingers interlacing like they were remembering a language they'd almost forgotten. Do you think we can keep doing this? Not perfectly. Just together. She leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the fireflies dance. We already are. Inside, through the open window, came the soft sound of Leo murmuring in his sleep, Maya sighing in her dreams, Elena whispering to her stuffed owl. The sounds of a home not rebuilt but reimagined. And as the last light faded and the first stars appeared, Clara realized the truth she'd been circling for years. Love wasn't about the grand moment you lost. It was about the 1,000 small moments you chose to stay. 3 years ago, he'd walked away from a future he couldn't imagine. Now, he knelt in the grass with 3 children who called him Dad, not because he deserved it, but because he'd finally learned how to love without fear. And she hadn't just survived the wound of his leaving. She'd turned it into a garden. The miracle wasn't that he came back. The miracle was that they'd both grown enough to meet in the middle, not as the people they were, but as the people their children needed them to become. And in the quiet hush of that spring night, with hands entwined and hearts finally at peace, they didn't need a title, a ring, or a promise spoken aloud. They had something far more powerful, the quiet certainty that tomorrow and every day after, they'd choose each other.